The key turned in the lock with a sound like something waking up. Not a sharp click, not the rusty groan of a mechanism that had given up years ago. It was softer than that. A slow, deliberate surrender of metal to metal, as if the door had been waiting all this time for exactly this key and exactly this moment. The kind of sound you might hear in a house that has been holding its breath, not knowing when it would be allowed to exhale. Maya Ward stood on the cracked sidewalk of Sycamore Street, her hand still resting on the brass key she had just turned, her fingers trembling slightly from something that wasn't cold. The afternoon sun had begun to tilt toward the western pines, throwing long shadows across the brick facade of the building in front of her. A single-story structure with a faded green awning and a sign that still read June's Kitchen in cursive lettering, though the J had begun to peel at the edges. The windows were clean. That was the first thing she noticed. Not boarded up, not filmed with years of grime, but clean. Inside, she could see the outline of tables covered in white cloths, chairs stacked neatly, a counter that ran the length of the back wall. It looked like a place that had closed yesterday, not 8 months ago. She pressed her palm flat against the wooden door, feeling the grain beneath her skin. Her other hand still held the black garbage bag that contained everything she owned in the world. A few t-shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, a worn hoodie, a toothbrush, and a photograph of a woman she barely remembered. Her mother, Lily. Maya was 18 years old. She had exactly $41 in her pocket. She had been homeless for approximately 9 hours, and according to the letter she had read 4 times on the Greyhound bus that brought her here, she now owned a restaurant. The door swung inward before she could push it, not because she had opened it, because the lock had been waiting to release and the door had been waiting to welcome, and the building itself seemed to know that the moment had finally arrived. Maya stepped inside. The smell hit her first. Not the smell of abandonment, the stale air, the dust, the decay that she had expected. This was different. This was lemon oil and old wood and something else beneath it. Something warmer. Cumin, maybe. Garlic. A faint sweetness that might have been cinnamon or vanilla or the ghost of a peach cobbler baked years ago. The air was cool and still, but it wasn't dead. It was waiting. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, her garbage bag hanging from her fist, her broken backpack slipping off one shoulder, the jade pendant around her neck, the only thing her mother had left her, the only thing Mrs. Reeves had managed to keep safe through all those years of foster placements, rested against her collarbone, cool and smooth. The dining room was small. 10 tables, each covered in a white tablecloth that had been protected by a layer of plastic sheeting, now dusted with the fine particles of 8 months. The chairs were pushed in neatly, their wooden legs dark and polished. A ceiling fan turned slowly overhead, though she couldn't remember flipping a switch. Maybe the air itself had been moving all along, circulating through the bones of the place, keeping it alive. She walked forward slowly, her sneakers squeaking slightly on the worn linoleum floor. The counter stretched along the back wall, a long stretch of dark wood with a row of stools bolted to the floor. Behind the counter, she could see the pass-through window into the kitchen. A silver bell sat on the counter, the kind you might tap with your palm to summon someone from the back. Above the bell, someone had hung a small sign. Ring for love. Maya set down her garbage bag. She set down her backpack. She pulled out one of the stools, the one at the very end, nearest the kitchen, and sat down heavily as if her legs had finally remembered how tired they were. She had not slept in nearly 30 hours. The night before, she had lain awake in her bed at the group home, staring at the ceiling and counting the cracks in the plaster. 126 cracks. She had counted them 100 times before, during other sleepless nights, other moments when the weight of being unwanted had pressed down on her chest until she couldn't breathe. But this night had been different. This night, she had held the letter from David Harrison, attorney at law, and tried to understand what it meant. Dear Maya, I am writing to inform you of the passing of your maternal grandmother, June Palmer, who died on September 14th of this year. Mrs. Palmer left specific instructions that you be contacted upon your 18th birthday, as prior attempts to locate you were unsuccessful due to your status as a ward of the state. Mrs. Palmer has bequeathed to you full ownership of the commercial property located at 412 Sycamore Street, Millbrook, North Carolina, known as June's Kitchen, including all contents, equipment, and associated assets. Enclosed, please find the key to the premises. Mrs. Palmer asked me to tell you something else. She said, "Tell her I never stopped looking. Tell her the door is open." Maya had read those words so many times that the paper had begun to soften at the creases. Tell her I never stopped looking. 14 years. Her grandmother had looked for her for 14 years. All that time, Maya had believed she had no family, no one who wanted her, no one who even remembered she existed. She had been passed from group home to group home. A file folder with a name and a case number and a history that no one bothered to read. She had been told in 100 different ways that she was too old, too difficult, too damaged, too much. And all along, somewhere in a small town she had never heard of, an old woman had been searching for her. She had died 8 months ago. 8 months. Maya had been 17 years old, still trapped in the system, still sleeping on a twin bed in a room she shared with 3 other girls, still eating institutional food and wearing donated clothes and believing she was invisible. And June Palmer had been dying, alone, in a town called Millbrook, with a restaurant she had kept alive for reasons no one understood. Tell her the door is open. The door had been open all along. She just hadn't known where to find it. The sound of a car passing on Sycamore Street pulled Maya back to the present. She looked around the dining room again, really looked this time, letting her eyes adjust to the dim light filtering through the clean windows. That was when she saw the photographs. They were everywhere, hanging on every wall, covering every available space, a gallery of faces and moments and memories that spanned decades. She stood up from the stool and walked toward the nearest wall, her heart beginning to beat faster. The first photograph showed a young woman with long dark hair and a wide smile, standing in front of a birthday cake with too many candles. She was beautiful in the way that old photographs are beautiful. Slightly faded, slightly soft at the edges, as if time itself had tried to blur her, but couldn't quite manage it. Her eyes were the same shade of brown as Maya's own eyes. Her cheekbones had the same shape. Her smile had the same crooked tilt. Maya reached out and touched the glass of the frame. Lily's 16th birthday. Read a small label at the bottom, written in careful cursive, June's Kitchen, 1994. Her mother, Lily Palmer, who had died when Maya was 4 years old in an accident that no one had ever fully explained. Lily Palmer, who had been 28 years old and pregnant with a child who didn't survive, leaving Maya alone with a father who had disappeared 2 years later and an aunt who had surrendered her to the state within a year. Maya had no memories of her mother, only fragments. The smell of bread baking, a voice singing something in the kitchen, the feeling of being held, of being safe, of being loved in a way that she had never experienced again. She moved to the next photograph. Lily at a high school graduation, holding a diploma and wearing a cap that kept slipping over her eyes. Lily in an apron, standing at the counter of what looked like this very restaurant, stirring something in a large pot. Lily with her arm around an older woman with the same dark hair, the same warm eyes, the same smile. June, her grandmother. The photographs continued around the room, a chronology of a life that Maya had never known. Lily as a toddler, covered in cake. Lily as a teenager, laughing with friends. Lily as a young woman, holding a kitchen knife and posing like a warrior. And then, toward the end of the wall, a photograph that made Maya's breath catch in her throat. Lily, older now, holding a baby. The baby was wrapped in a yellow blanket, and Lily was looking down at her with an expression of such pure, unguarded love that Maya felt tears prick at her eyes. Lily and Maya, June's Kitchen, 2005. The year her mother died. The year everything ended. Maya pressed her palm against her chest, feeling the jade pendant beneath her shirt. This was the woman who had worn this necklace. This was the woman who had held her, who had sung to her, who had promised her a future that never came. She looked around the room again, counting the photographs. Dozens of them. Maybe more than 100. All of Lily, all of this place, all of a story that Maya had been excluded from. And then she saw the blank wall. It was at the far end of the dining room, near the door to what looked like a back office. The wall was empty, completely bare, except for a small corkboard that had been mounted at eye level. On the corkboard, someone had pinned a note. This wall is for Maya's pictures when she comes home. The handwriting was the same careful cursive from the photograph labels. June had left her a wall, a space reserved for her photographs, for her life. A place that had been waiting, just like the door, just like the key, just like everything else in this building. Maya sank to the floor, her back against the blank wall, and finally let herself cry. She didn't know how long she sat there. Minutes, maybe. An hour. The light through the windows shifted as the afternoon wore on, and the ceiling fan continued its slow rotation. And the building held her in its quiet patience. Eventually, the tears stopped. They always stopped. Maya had learned a long time ago that crying didn't change anything, that tears were just water and salt, and that the world kept moving whether you were ready or not. But this time felt different. This time, she wasn't crying because she was sad. She was crying because she was full, because she had spent 18 years believing she was empty, that she had no history, no family, no place in the world. And now she was sitting in a restaurant that belonged to her, surrounded by photographs of people who shared her blood, her face, her name. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and stood up. The garbage bag and backpack were still by the counter. Her $41 were still in her pocket. She was still 18 years old and technically homeless and utterly alone in a town she had never visited. But something had shifted. Something had opened. She walked toward the counter, her eyes scanning the photographs again as she moved. Lily at prom. Lily at a county fair, holding a stuffed animal and grinning. Lily in the kitchen, flour on her face, laughing at something off camera. Lily and an older man Maya didn't recognize, both of them wearing aprons and holding spatulas like swords. The photographs stopped at the register. A thick envelope sat there, cream-colored, unmarked except for a single word written in the same careful cursive. Maya. She picked it up. The paper was heavy, expensive, the kind you might use for a letter you wanted someone to keep forever. She turned it over in her hands, feeling the weight of it, the promise of it. Inside was a photograph, an old woman with silver hair and kind eyes, standing in the doorway of this restaurant, her arms open wide as if she was welcoming someone home. The photograph was dated 2019, 4 years ago, 5 years before Maya would finally arrive. On the back, in that same handwriting, "Waiting for you, my girl." Beneath the photograph was the letter, pages of it covered front and back in handwriting that sometimes trembled, sometimes steadied, as if the act of writing had required more strength than the old woman had to give. Maya sat down on the stool again, the one at the end of the counter, and began to read. "My dearest Maya, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. I'm sorry for that. I wanted to be here when you came home. I wanted to see your face, to hold you, to tell you in person everything I'm going to write in this letter. But I've been sick for a while now, and I've learned that some things don't wait for us to be ready. I need you to know the truth, the whole truth, not the version of it that you've been told, not the fragments and rumors and lies that have followed you through your life, the truth. Your mother, Lily, was my only child. She was the center of my world, the light of every room she entered. When she met your father, I was happy for her. He seemed kind. He seemed steady. He seemed like someone who would protect her, who would love her, who would build a life with her. I was wrong. When Lily died, I was devastated. But I was also suspicious. The story your father told me, that you had died with her, that there had been an accident, that there was no one left, it didn't make sense. There was no death certificate for you, no grave, no obituary. When I asked for details, he became defensive. When I pressed harder, he stopped answering my calls. And then he disappeared. I spent the next 14 years looking for you. I hired private investigators. I called every social service agency in the state. I filed petitions, wrote letters, made phone calls that never got returned. I was told, again and again, that I had no standing. that I was too old, that the system didn't work that way, that I should give up. I never gave up. I opened this restaurant because I needed something to do with my hands while I waited. I used your mother's recipes, her cornbread, her pot roast, her peach cobbler, because I wanted to keep her alive. I wanted to build something that would be here for you when you finally found your way home. Every meal I cooked was a prayer. Every customer who sat at this counter was a witness to my hope. I didn't know if you would ever come. I didn't know if you were alive, if you were safe, if you would even want to know me after everything you'd been through. But I believed. I believed that somewhere, somehow, we would find each other. And now you're here. This restaurant is yours now. All of it. The building, the equipment, the recipes, the love that went into every meal. I've set aside some money in an account at the Millbrook Savings Bank, enough to cover the utilities and basic expenses for a few years. Harold Perkins, the man who owns the hardware store next door, has the details. He's been keeping an eye on the place for me. You can trust him. I don't know what you want to do with your life, Maya. I don't know if you want to stay here or sell the building or walk away and never look back. Whatever you choose, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you for surviving. I'm proud of you for making it this far. I'm proud of you for opening the door. Your mother's jade pendant, the one you're wearing right now, I hope, was mine before it was hers. It belonged to my mother and her mother before that. It's been passed down through 4 generations of women who never stopped fighting, never stopped hoping, never stopped believing that the next chapter would be better than the last. You are the next chapter, Maya. You are the reason I kept going. So cook something, burn something, make mistakes, learn, grow. Turn this place into whatever you need it to be. The kitchen is fully stocked. The recipes are in a binder on the shelf above the stove. And the door is open. Always open. I love you. I've loved you since before you were born. I've loved you through every year of separation, every dead end, every sleepless night, and I will love you for the rest of forever, wherever I am. Welcome home, my girl. June. Maya finished reading the letter. She sat very still. The pages spread across the counter in front of her, her hands flat against the cool wood. The jade pendant felt warm against her chest, as if it had absorbed her body heat, as if it had been waiting all these years to be worn by someone who understood its weight. She had never been loved like this, not once in her entire life. She had been tolerated, managed, processed, filed, and forgotten. But she had never been loved with the kind of ferocity that could survive 14 years of silence, that could build a restaurant out of grief, that could write a letter like this and leave it waiting on a counter for a granddaughter who might never arrive. She thought about the blank wall, the corkboard, the note that said, "This wall is for Maya's pictures when she comes home." She thought about the photograph of June standing in the doorway, her arms open, her smile welcoming. She thought about the key turning in the lock, the sound of something waking up, and then she heard it. A knock. Not the sharp rap of someone demanding attention, something softer. A few gentle taps, the kind of knock you might make if you weren't sure anyone was home, if you were checking on a neighbor you hadn't seen in a while, if you were hoping for an answer but prepared for silence. Maya looked up. Through the glass of the front door, she could see the silhouette of an old man. He was wearing a plaid shirt and a baseball cap, and he was holding something in his hands, a paper bag, maybe, or a box. He knocked again, softer this time, and then he stepped back and waited. She stood up from the stool. Her legs felt unsteady, but she made her way to the door anyway, unlocking it with a twist of her wrist. The man on the sidewalk was older than she had expected, 70, maybe 75. His face was lined with years and weather, and his eyes were the pale blue of a winter sky. But there was something kind about him, something patient. He didn't rush forward when the door opened. He just stood there, his hands at his sides, and looked at her. "You must be Maya," he said. His voice was soft, worn smooth by years of use. The kind of voice that had told stories to children, that had offered comfort to the grieving, that had said goodbye to too many people. She nodded, not trusting her own voice. The old man smiled. It was a sad smile, but a genuine one. I'm Harold. Harold Perkins. June was my best friend. She told me you'd come someday. She made me promise to be here when you did. He held up the paper bag. Brought you some things. Blackberry jam. June's recipe from the bushes behind her house. Butter from the creamery on Highway 15. And sweet tea, because nobody should have to face their first day in Millbrook without sweet tea. Maya looked at the bag. She looked at Harold's kind face. She looked back at the restaurant behind her, at the photographs on the walls, at the counter where June's letter still lay open. I don't know what I'm doing, she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. She hated how young she sounded, how small, how lost. Harold nodded slowly. That's okay, he said. None of us do, really. We just keep showing up and hoping for the best. Can I come in? The floors probably need mopping. June always made me mop on Tuesdays. Force of habit. Maya stepped aside. She didn't know why. She didn't know this man, didn't know this town, didn't know anything about running a restaurant, or living on her own, or building a life from the ashes of a past she had never understood. But the door was open. It had always been open, she just hadn't known where to find it. Harold moved through the restaurant with the ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times. He pulled the plastic sheeting off the tables, folded each piece neatly, and stacked them in a pile by the door. He checked the windows, tested the locks, turned on a few lights that Maya hadn't noticed before. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if he had all the time in the world. The utilities are still on, he said, more to himself than to her. June set up an account years ago, made sure there was always enough to cover the bills. The water's running, the gas is connected, the refrigerator's empty, but it's cold. He opened the door to the kitchen and peered inside. Smells good in here. That's the lemon oil. I've been coming by once a week to dust and mop. June would have had my hide if I let the place go. Maya followed him into the kitchen. It was smaller than she had expected. A home kitchen, really, not the industrial operation she had imagined. A 6-burner gas stove against one wall, a large refrigerator against another, a prep table in the center with a butcher block surface that had been worn smooth by years of use. Pots and pans hung from hooks above the stove. Knives were arranged on a magnetic strip by the sink, and on a shelf above the stove, held in place by 2 ceramic roosters, was a 3-ring binder with the words, June's Kitchen Recipes, written on the spine in marker. You cook? Harold asked. Maya shrugged. I worked in the kitchen at the group home. Nothing fancy, just basic stuff. That's more than most, Harold said. June always said cooking was just paying attention. You pay attention long enough, you figure it out. He opened the pantry door. Cans and boxes lined the shelves. Flour, sugar, cornmeal, beans, tomatoes, broth. Everything neatly organized, everything labeled in that same careful cursive. She kept it stocked, Harold said quietly. Every month, she'd go to the Piggly Wiggly and buy a few more things, just in case. Just in case you came home and wanted to cook something. Maya turned away, pretending to examine the stove. She didn't want Harold to see her cry again. She had already cried enough for one day, enough for a lifetime, and she was tired of feeling like a child who couldn't hold herself together. But Harold didn't seem to notice, or maybe he did notice, and he was kind enough to pretend otherwise. He busied himself with checking the pilot light on the stove, testing the water pressure at the sink, opening and closing the oven door, to make sure the hinges were still sound. June used to say that a kitchen was the heart of any home, he said. She said you could tell everything you needed to know about a family by how they cooked, whether they used butter or margarine, whether they measured or just threw things in, whether they sang while they worked or stood in silence. He looked at Maya over his shoulder. She sang, off-key, mostly. But she sang. Maya almost smiled. She could picture it. An old woman with silver hair standing at this stove, stirring a pot and singing something her mother had taught her. A chain of women, passing down songs and recipes and the weight of living. Did she have any family? Maya asked. Besides my mother, I mean, any brothers or sisters? Harold shook his head. Just you. Just Lily. She came from a long line of only children, going back generations. That's why the restaurant meant so much to her. It was her way of building a family, even when blood failed her. He sat down on one of the stools by the counter and gestured for Maya to join him. She hesitated for a moment, then pulled out the stool next to his and sat. I need to tell you some things, Harold said. About June. About what happened. About why it took so long for her to find you. Maya nodded. She wasn't sure she was ready to hear it, but she also knew she couldn't avoid it forever. The truth was already in the letter, already in the photographs, already in the bones of this building. She just needed someone to fill in the gaps. Your father, Harold began, was not a good man. I don't know if you remember him. I hope you don't. But I need you to understand that what he did, taking you away, lying about what happened, it wasn't about you. It was about him, his pride, his fear, his inability to face what he'd done. What did he do? Maya's voice was barely a whisper. Harold was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, he was driving the night Lily died. They were arguing about something, money probably, or the baby she was carrying. He lost control of the car. Lily died at the scene. The baby died at the hospital. Your father walked away with a broken arm and a story that didn't add up. Maya felt the pendant press against her chest, heavy as a stone. He told the police it was an accident, Harold continued. Maybe it was. Maybe he was just careless, not malicious. But when June started asking questions, when she started pushing for answers, he panicked. He took you and ran, told everyone you had died with your mother, changed his name, disappeared into the system. Then why didn't he keep me? Maya asked. If he went through all that trouble to take me, why did he give me up? Harold's eyes were sad. Because he couldn't take care of you, because he was broken and scared and maybe a little bit evil. Because the same selfishness that made him lie about what happened made him unable to be a father. He gave you to his sister, your aunt, and she gave you to the state within a year. And by the time June figured out where you might be, you'd already been moved 3 times. Your file was sealed, your name had been changed, you were lost. Until now, Maya said. Until now, Harold agreed. They sat in silence for a moment. The ceiling fan turned overhead. Somewhere outside, a bird called out a long rising note that echoed off the brick buildings. I'm sorry, Harold said finally. I'm sorry you had to grow up alone. I'm sorry we couldn't find you sooner. I'm sorry June never got to hold you, never got to tell you herself how much she loved you. Maya shook her head. She told me, she said. In the letter, she told me everything. Harold looked at her sharply. The letter. You found it? On the counter, by the register. A slow smile spread across Harold's face. Good. She wrote that letter over the course of a year, started it a dozen times, tore up a dozen drafts. She wanted to get it right. She wanted you to know. He stood up, stretching his back with a soft groan. Well, I should let you settle in. The apartment above the restaurant is yours too. June fixed it up a few years ago. Bedroom, bathroom, small living area. It's not fancy, but it's clean. There are sheets in the closet and towels in the bathroom. He picked up the paper bag he had brought and set it on the counter. The jam will keep. The sweet tea needs to be refrigerated. And if you need anything at all, I'm next door. The hardware store, I'm there every day except Sunday. Maya stood up too, suddenly afraid of being left alone. Harold? He paused at the door. Thank you, she said, for keeping the place alive, for mopping the floors and paying the bills and waiting. Thank you. Harold's eyes glistened. June would have done the same for me, he said. That's what family does. Even the family we choose. He opened the door, letting in a gust of warm afternoon air. Welcome home, Maya. And then he was gone, walking slowly down the sidewalk toward the hardware store, his shoulders rounded with age and something that looked like relief. Maya stood in the doorway, watching him go. The sun had dipped below the pines now, and the street was cast in the soft purple light of early evening. A few cars passed, a dog barked somewhere in the distance. The world went on, ordinary and unremarkable, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. She turned back to the restaurant. The photographs on the walls seemed different now, softer somehow, as if the slanting evening light had transformed them into something more than paper and glass. Lily smiled at her from a dozen different angles. June waited in the doorway of her own photograph, arms open, patient as always. This wall is for Maya's pictures when she comes home. She thought about the binder on the shelf above the stove, the recipes her mother had written, her grandmother had preserved, cornbread and pot roast and peach cobbler, and 100 other dishes that had kept June going through 14 years of searching. Maya walked back into the kitchen. She opened the pantry and took down a bag of cornmeal. She found buttermilk in the refrigerator. Still fresh, still cold, as if someone had known she would need it. She gathered eggs and salt and baking powder, setting everything on the prep table in the center of the kitchen. She hadn't cooked anything in months. The group home had a rotating schedule of chores, and Maya had always volunteered for kitchen duty because it was warm and quiet, and no one bothered her there. Mrs. Reeves, the foster mother who had given her the jade pendant, had taught her the basics: how to season a cast iron skillet, how to tell when oil was hot enough, how to mix batter until it was just combined. No more, no less. Cooking is just paying attention, Harold had said. Maya paid attention. She preheated the oven to 400 degrees. She set a cast iron skillet on the stove and added a generous pat of butter, watching it melt and sizzle. She mixed the cornmeal with the buttermilk, the eggs, the salt, the baking powder, stirring until everything came together in a thick, golden batter. The binder was open on the counter, propped up against the ceramic roosters. June's handwriting filled the pages, precise and careful, with notes in the margins in a different hand. Looser, more instinctive, the handwriting of someone who cooked by feel rather than by measurement. Lily's note: add a little more buttermilk if the batter feels stiff. You want it to be wet, not dry. June's note: Lily never measured anything. I had to figure out the proportions myself. Took me 3 years to get it right. Maya smiled. A real smile. The first one she could remember in a long time. Two women she had never known talking to each other across the years through the margins of a recipe book. A conversation that had been waiting for her to overhear. She poured the batter into the hot skillet. It sizzled and spread, filling the kitchen with the smell of butter and corn and something that felt like home. She slid the skillet into the oven and set the timer for 20 minutes. While the cornbread baked, she wandered through the restaurant again. The light was almost gone now, and she turned on the overhead lights one by one, watching the room come alive. The photographs glowed in the warm light, the faces of her mother and grandmother watching over her. She found the back office behind the kitchen, a small room with a desk, a filing cabinet, and a bookshelf filled with cookbooks and novels, and a few photo albums. She opened one of the albums and found more photographs. Lily as a baby, Lily as a child, Lily at her first day of school, Lily at her first dance, Lily at her wedding, Lily holding a baby girl in a yellow blanket. Maya traced her finger over the image of her mother's face. She had her mother's eyes, her mother's cheekbones, her mother's crooked smile. She had never known that before. The timer dinged. She went back to the kitchen and pulled the skillet from the oven. The cornbread was golden brown, cracked across the top, with a pat of butter still bubbling in the center. It looked exactly the way Mrs. Reeves had taught her to make it. Exactly the way June had written it down. Exactly the way Lily had made it 3 generations ago, standing in this same kitchen with flour on her apron and a song on her lips. Maya cut a small square and took a bite. It was perfect, warm and slightly sweet, with a crust that crunched between her teeth and a center that melted on her tongue. It tasted like buttermilk and corn and the faintest hint of something else. Love, maybe, or hope, or the accumulated weight of all the meals that had been cooked in this kitchen before she was born. She ate the entire piece standing at the counter, leaning over so crumbs wouldn't fall on the floor. When she finished, she cut another piece and ate that too. She hadn't realized how hungry she was. She hadn't eaten since the vending machine at the bus station, a bag of pretzels and a warm soda that had cost her nearly $5. She was reaching for a third piece when she heard another knock at the door. Harold stood on the sidewalk holding a different paper bag this time. "Forgot to give you these," he said. "Groceries. Just some basics. Eggs, milk, bread, butter. Enough to get you through the night." Maya opened the door wider. "I made cornbread." Harold's eyebrows rose. "Did you now?" "Well, Lily's recipe. From the binder." He stepped inside, setting the bag on the counter. "Let me see." She led him to the kitchen and showed him the skillet. The cornbread was still warm, still golden, still perfect. Harold stood looking at it for a long moment, his hands on his hips, his head tilted to one side. "She would have loved this," he said quietly. "June, I mean. She would have loved knowing that you found the recipe, that you made it, that this kitchen is alive again." He reached out and broke off a small piece of the cornbread, popping it into his mouth. He chewed slowly, his eyes distant, as if he was tasting something more than cornmeal and buttermilk. "It's good," he said. "Really good." Lily would have been proud. Maya wasn't sure what to say to that. She had never made anyone proud before. Not her teachers, not her caseworkers, not the foster families who had shuffled her from one house to another. She had been too quiet, too strange, too damaged to be anything but a burden. But Harold was looking at her with something that looked like respect, like she had done something worth noticing. "There's a key to the apartment on the hook by the back door," he said. "The bed's made up. Towels in the bathroom closet. If you need anything in the night, my number's on the corkboard in the office." He headed for the door, then stopped. "One more thing. The restaurant, June used to open at 6 in the morning, just for coffee and breakfast. Nothing fancy, just eggs and toast and biscuits. She said the early hours were her favorite. The town was still sleeping, and she had the whole place to herself." He looked back at Maya. "You don't have to do anything tomorrow, or the next day, or the next. This place will wait for you as long as you need it to. But if you want to open the doors, just for an hour, just to see how it feels, I'll be next door. I'll bring the coffee." And then he was gone again, walking slowly down the darkening street, his shadow long and thin in the glow of the streetlights. Maya locked the door behind him. She stood in the middle of the dining room, surrounded by photographs of people she was only beginning to know, and tried to imagine what tomorrow might look like. 6 in the morning, coffee and breakfast, the town still sleeping. She thought about the blank wall, the corkboard, the note that said, "This wall is for Maya's pictures when she comes home." Maybe she would take a photograph tomorrow. Something simple, the skillet of cornbread, maybe, or the morning light through the windows. Something to mark the first day of whatever this was going to be. She climbed the stairs to the apartment above the restaurant. It was small and clean, just as Harold had promised. A bed with a quilt that looked handmade. A nightstand with a lamp and a copy of a novel she had never heard of. A closet with towels and sheets and a few empty hangers. There was a photograph on the dresser, June and Lily, years ago, standing in front of the restaurant. Lily was holding a spatula and laughing. June had her arm around her daughter's shoulders, and both of them were looking at the camera as if they had just told a secret. Maya picked up the photograph. She held it carefully, the way you might hold something fragile, something that could break if you weren't gentle. "I'm here," she said aloud, her voice strange and small in the quiet room. "I found it. I found you." The photograph didn't answer. It couldn't, but Maya felt something shift in her chest anyway, something loosen and relax, as if a knot she had been carrying for 18 years had finally begun to untie. She set the photograph back on the dresser. She washed her face in the bathroom sink, using a bar of soap that smelled like lavender. She changed into the cleanest t-shirt she could find in her garbage bag and crawled into the bed, pulling the quilt up to her chin. The sheets smelled like lavender too, or maybe that was just the soap. Or maybe June had chosen them that way, had washed them in lavender and folded them neatly and left them in the closet waiting for a granddaughter who might never come. Maya closed her eyes. She thought about her mother, singing in the kitchen. She thought about her grandmother, writing a letter for 14 years. She thought about Harold, mopping the floors every Tuesday, keeping the lights on, believing that someday someone would unlock the door. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, Maya Ward fell asleep without feeling alone. She woke to the sound of rain. Not the hard driving rain of a summer storm, but something softer. A steady patter against the window, a rhythm that felt more like music than weather. The room was gray with early morning light, and the quilt was warm around her shoulders, and for a moment Maya didn't know where she was. Then she saw the photograph on the dresser. June and Lily, frozen in time, their faces full of a happiness that had outlasted them. She sat up slowly, her body was stiff from the bus ride, from sleeping in a new bed, from the emotional exhaustion of the day before. But something else stirred in her chest, something she didn't quite recognize at first. Purpose. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood up. The floor was cold beneath her bare feet, and she padded to the window to look outside. Sycamore Street was quiet in the rain. The hardware store across the street was dark, but she could see a light on in the back, a single bulb glowing through a dusty window. Harold. Probably getting ready for the day. The restaurant below her was dark too, but she could feel it waiting. The photographs on the walls, the binder on the shelf, the skillet on the stove, still holding the remnants of last night's cornbread. 6 in the morning, coffee and breakfast. The town still sleeping. Maya checked her phone. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. 5:47. She dressed quickly, jeans, a clean t-shirt, the worn hoodie that had seen her through 3 group homes, and countless sleepless nights. She brushed her teeth with her finger and a dab of toothpaste, ran her fingers through her tangled hair, and clipped the jade pendant around her neck. The stairs creaked as she descended. The restaurant was dark and quiet, the photographs watching her from the walls. She turned on the lights, one by one, the way she had done last night, watching the room come alive. In the kitchen, she found a coffee maker on the counter. A bag of beans sat beside it. Whole and fragrant, she ground enough for a pot, filled the reservoir with water, and pressed the button. The machine gurgled to life, filling the kitchen with the smell of freshly brewed coffee. While it brewed, she checked the pantry again. Eggs, butter, flour, a few apples that were still firm, still sweet. She found a loaf of bread in the freezer. June had labeled it sandwich bread, bake when needed, and set it on the counter to thaw. She was cracking eggs into a bowl when she heard the knock at the door. Harold stood on the sidewalk, holding a thermos and a small cardboard box. He was wearing the same plaid shirt as yesterday, or maybe a different one that looked exactly the same. His baseball cap was pulled low against the rain. "Couldn't sleep," he said when Maya opened the door. "Thought I'd come keep you company." She stepped aside to let him in. "I made coffee. I brought coffee too." He held up the thermos. "Now we have too much coffee." "That's not a problem I've ever had before." He followed her into the kitchen and set the box on the prep table. Biscuits. From the diner on Main Street. Figured you might not have breakfast figured out yet. They were still warm, still wrapped in wax paper, still glistening with butter. "I was going to make eggs." Eggs and biscuits. That's a proper breakfast. He busied himself with finding plates and forks, opening cabinets as if he had done it 1,000 times. Which he had, probably. He had kept this place alive for 3 years, mopping floors and running water and waiting for someone to arrive. Maya finished scrambling the eggs and divided them between 2 plates. She added a biscuit to each plate, a pat of butter, a spoonful of the blackberry jam Harold had brought yesterday. She poured 2 mugs of coffee and carried everything to the counter, where Harold was already sitting on his usual stool. They ate in silence for a few minutes. The rain continued to fall outside, soft and steady, and the restaurant felt smaller somehow, more intimate, as if the weather had drawn the walls closer together. "You thinking about opening today?" Harold asked finally. Maya looked at the door. The windows were streaked with rain, and the street beyond was empty. I don't know. I don't even know how to run a restaurant. Neither did June. She learned as she went. Burned a lot of toast in the beginning. What if no one comes? Harold shrugged. Then you'll have a quiet day. Maybe that's what you need. He finished his eggs and pushed his plate aside. You know, June used to say that running a restaurant wasn't about the food. It was about the people. About creating a place where they could feel seen, feel welcome, feel like they mattered. She said anyone could cook, but not everyone could make someone feel at home. He looked at Maya. You have that. I saw it the moment you opened the door. You have her eyes, sure, but you have her heart, too. That's what matters. Maya didn't know what to say to that. She had never been told she had a heart before, not in any way that mattered. She had been told she was difficult, withdrawn, too quiet, too strange, but never that she had a heart. Maybe I'll just open for an hour, she said. See what happens. That's all any of us can do. He stood up and carried his plate to the sink. I'll be next door if you need me. The sign on the door says I open at 8, but I'll be there at 7:30 if you want to borrow anything. Sugar, cream, extra cups, whatever you need. He paused at the back door, his hand on the frame. One more thing. The photograph on the wall, the one of June in the doorway. She took that herself. Set up a tripod and everything. She wanted you to see her the way she wanted to be seen. Welcoming, hopeful, ready. He stepped out into the rain, pulling his collar up against the wet. You're not alone anymore, Maya. That's what this place is for. And then he was gone, walking quickly toward the hardware store, his footsteps splashing in the puddles. Maya stood in the kitchen for a long moment, listening to the coffee maker gurgle and the rainfall and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Then she walked to the front door and turned the lock. The door swung open. Rain blew in, misting her face and the first few feet of the dining room floor. She didn't close it. She propped it open with a rubber doorstop she found in a drawer by the register, the kind of simple tool that had probably been there for decades. The street was still empty, the rain was still falling, the town of Millbrook was still sleeping, unaware that a restaurant had just opened for the first time in nearly a year. Maya went back to the kitchen and poured herself another cup of coffee. She stood in the doorway, watching the rain, and waited. She didn't know if anyone would come. She didn't know if she was ready for this, if she could do this, if she had any right to claim this place as her own. But the door was open. It had always been open, and for the first time in her life, Maya Ward was standing on the other side. The rain began to slow around 7:15. Maya had spent the past hour cleaning. Not because the restaurant needed it, Harold had kept it spotless, but because she needed something to do with her hands. She had wiped down the counter 3 times, rearranged the sugar caddies on every table, and polished the brass bell until it gleamed. She had also taken a photograph. It was nothing special, just a shot of the skillet on the stove, the morning light through the window, the steam rising from a fresh pot of coffee. But she had printed it using the small photo printer she found in the office. June had left a box of paper, a full ink cartridge, and a note that said for your wall, and now she was standing in front of the corkboard, trying to decide where to put it. This wall is for Maya's pictures when she comes home. She pinned the photograph to the corkboard. It wasn't much, just a small square of paper a moment captured in time. But it was hers, the first photograph on a wall that had been waiting for her for years. She was still standing there when she heard footsteps on the sidewalk. A woman appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the gray morning light. She was older, maybe 60, with short gray hair and a raincoat that had seen better days. She was holding an umbrella, though the rain had mostly stopped, and she was looking at Maya with an expression of cautious curiosity. You're open? The woman asked. Maya nodded. Just for coffee. And breakfast. I have eggs and biscuits and jam. The woman stepped inside, closing her umbrella and shaking it out on the porch. I'm Eileen. I live down the street. I saw the lights on and thought I'd check. She looked around the dining room, her eyes moving slowly from the photographs to the clean tables to the counter where the coffee pot sat steaming. This place has been closed for a while. Since June passed, I am her granddaughter. Maya said. Maya. Eileen's face softened. June talked about you all the time, really. She never stopped hoping you'd find your way here. She walked to the counter and sat down on the stool at the end. The same one Maya had sat on yesterday, the same one June had probably sat on 100 times. I'll take a cup of coffee, black, and one of those biscuits, if you're offering. Maya poured the coffee and set it in front of Eileen. She added a biscuit to a small plate, a pat of butter, a spoonful of blackberry jam. She watched as Eileen took a bite, chewed slowly, swallowed. That's June's jam, Eileen said, from the bushes behind her house. Harold brought it. He said it was her recipe. Eileen nodded. She used to give me a jar every Christmas. Best jam I've ever had. She took another bite, then looked up at Maya. You look like her, you know. Lily, I remember her from when she was young. She had the same eyes, the same way of standing, like she was ready for anything. Maya didn't know what to say to that. She poured herself another cup of coffee and sat down on the stool next to Eileen's. Are you going to keep the place open? Eileen asked. I don't know, Maya said. I don't know anything about running a restaurant. Neither did June. She learned. That's what Harold said. Eileen smiled. Harold's a good man. He loved June, you know. Not in a romantic way. They were just friends. The best kind. He would have done anything for her. He did do anything for her. Kept this place alive when everyone else thought she was crazy for holding out hope. She finished her biscuit and wiped her fingers on a napkin. Well, I should let you get back to work. But I'll be back. For lunch, maybe. If you're serving lunch. Maya hadn't thought about lunch. She hadn't thought about anything beyond this moment. This cup of coffee. This first customer who had walked through the open door. I'll figure something out, she said. Eileen stood up and dug in her purse for her wallet. How much? Maya shook her head. It's on the house. First day. Eileen hesitated, then put her wallet away. Thank you, Maya, and welcome home. She walked to the door, pausing to look at the photographs on the walls. June would be proud, she said. She would be so proud. And then she was gone, walking down the wet sidewalk toward her house, her umbrella tapping against the pavement. Maya stood in the doorway, watching her go. The rain had stopped entirely now, and the clouds were beginning to break apart, revealing patches of pale blue sky. The street was waking up. A car started somewhere, a dog barked, a screen door slammed. She looked back at the photograph on the corkboard, the skillet on the stove, the morning light through the window, the steam rising from the coffee. This wall is for Maya's pictures when she comes home. She was home. She didn't know how long she would stay, or what she would do, or whether she was capable of turning this restaurant into something real. But for the first time in her life, she had a place that belonged to her, a place that had been waiting. She walked back to the kitchen and opened the binder again. June's kitchen recipes. She turned past the cornbread, past the pot roast, past the peach cobbler, until she found something simple, something she could make with what she had. Lily's tomato soup. She read the recipe twice, then gathered the ingredients from the pantry. Canned tomatoes, onions, butter, a splash of cream. It wasn't complicated, but nothing about this place was complicated. It was simple and honest and true, the way June had wanted it. She lit the burner beneath a heavy pot and added a generous amount of butter. The butter melted slowly, bubbling at the edges, filling the kitchen with the smell of something rich and warm. She diced the onions and added them to the pot, watching them soften and turn translucent. The door was still open, the rain had stopped. The town of Millbrook was waking up, unaware that a new chapter had begun at 412 Sycamore Street. Maya stirred the soup and thought about the wall. The blank wall, waiting for her photographs. She thought about the corkboard, the note in June's careful cursive. She thought about the brass key, still warm from being turned in the lock. She had $41 to her name. She had a garbage bag full of clothes. She had a broken backpack and a cracked phone and a jade pendant that had belonged to her mother and her grandmother and her great-grandmother before that. And she had a restaurant, a small, quiet restaurant in a small, quiet town with photographs on the walls and recipes in a binder and a door that had been open all along. She added the tomatoes to the pot, stirring slowly, watching the colors blend together. The soup was bright and red and fragrant, the kind of soup that made you feel warm just by looking at it. She tasted it. It needed salt. She added a pinch, tasted it again. Pepper. Another pinch. A little more cream. It was good. It was really good. She turned off the burner and covered the pot, letting the flavors settle. Then she walked to the front door and looked out at the street. The hardware store was open now. She could see Harold through the window, helping a customer find something on a high shelf. A few cars were parked along Sycamore Street. A woman walked past with a stroller, her toddler pointing at the restaurant sign, June's Kitchen. Maybe she would change the name. Maybe she wouldn't. Maybe she would keep it exactly as it was, a tribute to the woman who had refused to give up on her. She heard footsteps on the sidewalk. A man this time, younger than Harold, older than her. He was wearing coveralls and carrying a lunch pail, and he stopped in front of the open door. "You open?" he asked. Maya nodded. "For lunch. Tomato soup. And biscuits." The man looked at his watch, then at the restaurant, then back at Maya. "I've got 30 minutes. Soup sounds good." He walked inside, chose a table by the window, and sat down. Maya went to the kitchen and ladled soup into a bowl, added a biscuit on the side, carried it to his table. "Thank you," he said. "Haven't had June's cooking since she passed. Didn't think I ever would again." Maya didn't correct him. She let him believe the soup was June's, because in a way, it was. The recipe was June's. The tomatoes were from June's pantry. The love that had gone into building this place, into keeping it alive, into waiting for her, that was June's too. She was just carrying it forward. The man ate quickly, efficiently, the way people do when they have a limited time and a job to get back to. He left $5 on the table and a thank you on his way out the door. Maya cleared the bowl and washed it in the sink. She poured herself another cup of coffee and stood at the counter looking at the photographs on the walls. She thought about the blank wall again, the corkboard, the note. She thought about the photograph she had pinned there this morning, the skillet and the steam and the morning light. She would take more photographs. She would fill the wall, inch by inch, moment by moment. The restaurant at dawn, the first customer of the day. The soup simmering on the stove. Harold's hands, steady and kind, mopping the floor. She would fill the wall with evidence of her life, proof that she had been here, that she had found her way home. The door was still open, the rain had stopped, and Maya Ward, 18 years old and $41 to her name, began to cook.